you for tuning in to today's episode of Inside Austin's Agenda. I'm your host, Grace Reader. Today I'm joined by co-chair of Save Austin Now, Matt Makoviak. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
So first and foremost, if people have not heard of Save Austin Now, they have, they just don't know it. Talk about what Save Austin Now is.
Yeah, we started Save Austin Now in 2019 as a nonpartisan group, despite what some people say. One local Republican, myself, one local Democrat. And we decided that we fundamentally believe that local issues aren't partisan. And the reason you know that that's correct is no one's elected in a partisan election. There's no party primary. They're only elected in November or December if there's a runoff. So we took the view that these are nonpartisan races. Let's start a nonpartisan grassroots organization that would fight every single day to improve standard of living for Austinites. And so we do that through the lens of public safety as our number one issue, as you know, but we also focus on homelessness. We focus on accountability and transparency. We focus on affordability, and we focus on transportation. And so I'm very proud of what we've built. We're the largest grassroots organization in the history of Austin. It's actually not close. 64,000 email addresses on our Substack, saveaustinnow.substack.com. And almost 10,000 donors at this point, probably $8 or $9 million raised. As your viewers may know, in May of 2021, we were successful after 2 years in reinstating the homeless camping ban and ending the homeless experiment that was destroying our city. We tried to overturn defund the police in November of 2021 and were defeated. George Soros put 1.3 million of the 1.5 million against us, and we lost roughly 60-40. And then, as you know, we had a good success just recently with helping to lead the effort to defeat Prop Q, and we're very proud of that, and we're going to continue. We have a lot ahead of us.
We'll get into that in a moment. Let's talk a little bit about the effort to defeat Proposition Q. What does that look like when you all get involved in something like this? What does that look like?
Yeah, we're unique. We don't do things that we don't fully commit to. We don't have to do anything. And so, we have an immense ability to raise money. We've built up a lot of credibility, largest donor list in this city in terms of city politics. 40% of our supporters are Democrats and have been. People think that because I'm a somewhat prominent Republican that our group is Republican. It's actually not true. It's actually a smear in a way. But for us, the power of our organization is partly our ability to fundraise. It's partly our sort of ability to communicate. But it's also partly our ability to execute. We're able to put really sophisticated campaigns together and run them at a high level and measure what we're doing. And convince donors that it's a legitimate strategy that can be executed at a high level, and we can point to our track record. And so I am not by any means concluding that Prop Q was defeated entirely by Save Austin Now. It wasn't. The Restore ATX leadership group that Ellen Wood, Michael Searle, and a number of others led was very effective as well. And we were very grateful for the work they did, and lots of other people were involved too. Look, in the end, Prop Q was defeated because a massive, broad-based voter coalition came together to defeat it, over the opposition of our mayor and 9 of our 10 council members. And we do want to recognize the independence and the courage of Mark Duchin, the Central Austin first-term council member, who opposed Prop Q on the dais, opposed the campaign to support it, and believes we need an outside effort, an outside review of our budget, like what Houston did, to find efficiencies, to eliminate waste, to eliminate duplication, and to deliver core services more efficiently, which is something we agree with. And I think we're going to see one way or another soon. So when we get involved, we get fully involved. And in the end, there was no justification for a 20.2% city property tax increase in perpetuity at this time. Our city leaders had not done enough to convince taxpayers that the budget had been scrubbed and that we were really efficiently spending taxpayer dollars. As you know, the examples of waste in our budget have made Austin a laughingstock. $1 million for a ridiculous logo, $10 million for New York art at the airport, members and our city manager expensing lunches, wasting money on life coaches and furniture and art for their offices. The list goes on and on and on. And so I think if they'd been serious on the front end about really finding efficiencies, there was an opportunity to close that gap, that $33 million budget deficit gap. If they had done something there may have been an opportunity for them to perhaps put a tax rate election on the ballot and pass it. But the second part of it that was so hard for people to swallow is they didn't create a tax rate election to close the budget gap of $33 million. They created a tax rate increase that would have produced $110 million, with $50 million of it going to homelessness. We all have a heart for the homeless. We want to see them live lives of security and value and worth. But I don't think most people look at the way our city has spent money on homelessness and believe it's been done efficiently. I do believe our current mayor is doing a better job than our previous mayor. And I do have confidence in David Gray, our homeless strategy officer, who really is conscientious and cares about taxpayers. But to ask for that property tax increase, which would have hit every homeowner, every business owner, and yes, eventually every renter, was simply not justifiable. And so that's why you saw just an absolutely dominant election victory on behalf of the group that came together. Save Austin Now, Restore ATX Leadership, lots of other people. 63-37 in terms of the percentage. 109,000 votes, Grace. We had 90,000 votes on homeless. So it shows you that the dogs weren't willing to eat the dog food, really. They were not willing to go vote proactively for a tax increase at a time when the distrust between the taxpayers and city leaders was so significant.
We talked a lot on an election night about what this symbolizes and what it means. Moving forward, now that you've seen some city leaders react, you're seeing how they're moving forward. What are your thoughts on that now?
Well, we take the position that the single most important thing the city can do is fully fund public safety first. And that doesn't mean blank check. It doesn't mean no oversight. What it means is we're asking our police, our fire, and EMS to literally put their lives on the line and to save lives every hour of every day. And that's not just Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. A lot of times it's 3 a.m. on Christmas morning or on New Year's Eve. Really difficult times. You see this in the work that you do and the work that's done at KXAN. I mean, you guys are there on the ground. It is immoral to ask our police, fire, and EMS personnel to do that job, but to not give them the resources they need to do it. Now, police and fire were fully funded in the base budget that our city manager put forward before the tax rate election was proposed and advanced by the city. And we're pleased to hear that. And both of those organizations have existing contracts with the city for multiple years. So they're in a good shape in that regard. EMS is a different situation. We are not fully funding EMS. EMS has 4 fewer ambulances today than they did a year ago. I can't imagine if you walk down the street and you asked 100 people or 10 people, is it a good thing or a bad thing we have 4 fewer ambulances? Anyone would say it's a good thing. It is true, had the tax rate election passed, they would have had, I think, 16 new paramedic positions funded. We don't take the position that those things have to be funded now without that new money. We'd like to see them funded. We think those things are more important than higher city council member office budgets. We think they're more important than an automatic increase in homeless spending, et cetera. So it's about priorities. Budgets are about priorities. And so look, if the city was serious, truly serious, you would have an 11-0 vote that fully funds public safety first and then determines what the priorities are after that and makes tough decisions. We recognize these are tough decisions, but we're paying these people, what is it, $130,000 a year to do this job? The only thing they have to do is pass a budget every year. They actually don't have to do anything else. So we're a month or so into the new budget year. They need to get the new budget done. They now know what amount of revenue they're going to have. And so, the 70 or so thousand activists who support Save Austin Now want to see public safety fully funded. The state of Texas wants to see public safety fully funded. We have a range of options available to us if they're not serious about fully funding public safety. And that battle is not going to end today, tomorrow, or next week, next month. It's a constant battle because you have activists in the city who wake up every morning and work to undermine police, undermine fire, undermine EMS, and want money for other things taken away from those budgets. So, again, we wish the EMS Association, the Union for EMS, did not support Prop Q. I understand why they did. We now have the outcome there. We don't hold a grudge against them. We are pro-public safety. If the public safety unions are for something, Save Austin Now is for it. Because if they're for it, that means their members are for it. Their members are the ones who are being asked to do the work. So we're here to support the unions for police, fire, and EMS, period, full stop. We'll help them any way they ask. We'll help them any number of ways publicly and privately. But it's the single most important thing cities do. Because if you don't have cities do it, then only rich people are going to be safe. And that's not a city that anyone wants to live in. So that's really important. That's not the entire budget conversation, but we do believe a fully funded budget for public safety is job one. Job two is to figure out everything else. And there's a lot of important things the city does. Social services, city workers, there's so many things they do that are really important, but there are so many ways they can find efficiencies in the budget if they're serious about it. It's really a question of leadership and a question of willpower. And the message taxpayers sent with the Prop Q election was not confusing. It was not unclear. If it had been 52-48 or 51-49, that's a different situation. This was an overwhelming verdict, and we're watching. In terms of the response, look, the mayor put a statement out the night of the election I thought was serious and reasonable. Mark Duchin has been very serious and sober and thoughtful all along. From some of the member statements I saw from some others, I thought there were some absolutely ridiculous statements in there. And I would have to single out Vanessa Fuentes for specifically threatening EMS in her statement. And that statement did not go well across this city. I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of people that thought that was a really unwise, unintelligent, unnecessary statement from Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes. But again, people make mistakes, we'll see. In the end, the question is, what budget do they pass? What does it fund? What does it not fund? What priorities do they set? If they want to set a priority that says city council member budgets are more important than EMS, there's going to be a ferocious taxpayer response to that. If they want to say additional homeless funding at a time when homeless population is decreasing in our city based on what the city says, if they want to say increasing homeless spending is more important than EMS, they're going to see a ferocious response as well. So we're watching very closely, and I expect this to get resolved in the next few weeks.
As folks are listening, you referenced this. When we talk about EMS, there's a lot of budgets that they're working from. And so I think I have heard people get confused about when you say there's going to be cuts made to EMS, whether you mean from the budget that was passed in August, the budget that the city manager proposed in July, or whether you're talking about what we're working from now versus what we saw last year. There's really three kind of budgets that we're working from. When you're talking about EMS cuts, are you talking about, this budget that's being proposed now versus last year, not cutting from that 2025 fiscal year budget, or are you talking about from the August budget that was passed?
Grace, this is such an intelligent question, and it's so important. And I'm so glad you asked it, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and it's possible we've even contributed to the confusion. When the updated budget was released by the city manager after Prop Q, the number that went around was that EMS was going to see a $6.3 million cut. They were only going to see that $6.3 million if Prop Q passed, and they started developing and producing that additional $110 million in revenue. So to me, that budget was never real because Prop Q never happened. And I'm sure EMS wanted it. They wanted that additional funding, and they would have done good things with it, no question. Our position, to simplify, is if EMS is okay with it, we're okay with it. And again, it's very simple. I'm not more of an expert in EMS than they are. No one is. That includes the city council. And so, again, are they confident that with the budget they're given, they can do the job they've been asked to do? We are not going to accept less money for EMS this year than they had last year. That I will say. Are we saying that it needs to be the $6.3 million put back in at that higher budget level that's not happening now that Prop Q was defeated? I don't think we're saying that, and I don't think we're going to sharply criticize anyone that votes for a budget because it doesn't have that increase in there. That said, it comes down to priorities. If they're fully funding increases in city member budgets and not fully funding EMS, that's not acceptable to us. I don't believe that's acceptable to any of our 70,000 supporters. So again, it's a complicated answer. I wish I had a simple answer for you, but if EMS is okay with it, we're okay with it. If they're funding things that are less important than EMS, clearly, then that's not a sign that they're taking the budget seriously and they're taking public safety seriously, and that's not something that we're going to sit back and accept and be quiet about. But again, we're asking them to soberly and thoughtfully and carefully look at the message voters sent. This was not a low turnout election. 109,000 people voted against Prop Q, against the recommendation of the mayor, 9 out of 10 council members, the Austin Chronicle, the Travis County Democratic Party, and they did that because they concluded on their own the city cannot be trusted with this additional revenue without first regaining the trust of taxpayers. You don't regain the trust of taxpayers by passing a budget that does not fully fund public safety. So it's going to be real clear to all of us whether they got the message or not. And like I said before, we're watching very, very closely.
You keep saying that, and I remember on election night you gave me my favorite quote, which is that there's no education in the second kick of a mule. And then you said, but we'll kick again. What do you mean when you say that?
Yes. First of all, that's not a saying that I created. That's been around. It's a maxim. But what it means is that if a lesson is given, the lesson isn't more valuable the second time. It shouldn't be. You should get the lesson the first time. And so if they don't respond appropriately to the lesson that voters sent, it's not about us. It's about the lesson that voters sent. If they don't learn that lesson and show they've learned that lesson and start to regain the trust of taxpayers, then there's a range of options available to us. And they could include future elections, including the charter election, which was going to happen in May. You're going to have the convention center on the ballot, I believe, and you will likely have a 4 per truck staffing minimum for fire, which we support, which I believe will pass and which needs to pass. 4 per truck is not a selfish endeavor for fire. It is literally a question of public safety for those firefighters. A truck that arrives with 3 firefighters is less safe to each of those 3 firefighters than a truck with 4. They believe they need 4 per truck to respond appropriately, to minimize damage, to minimize loss of life, and to minimize risk to firefighters. And again, I have a tough time accepting that anyone on the city council or any city staff understand better the threat to firefighters than the fire union and individual firefighters. So you're going to have a charter election in May. There's time to put additional things on the ballot. We're going to watch and see how things develop. But what I will say is all options are on the table. And it's not just about the charter election. 5 members of the city council are on the ballot in November. All 5 of them supported Prop Q. They are now on the wrong side of a massive issue. And so that's where I talk about second kick of a mule. If they want to pass a budget that doesn't respond to what the message voters sent, then that's a second thing where they're on the wrong side of a majority of Austinites. So I'm not trying to be mysterious here. We haven't made a decision yet. We will make a decision soon. And it's up to the city council to regain the trust of taxpayers. It's not about our opinion. They're either taking this seriously or they aren't. They're either going to pass a budget that has the right priorities for our city, that respects the will of the taxpayers that was just very clearly expressed, and that gives public safety the resources it needs to do the job that we all rely on. Just one more point I'll make on EMS. Response times are really important. If average response time is 10 minutes or 5 minutes, it's the difference between life and death in a lot of cases. They talk about the golden hour in a critical incident. The golden hour meaning that first hour when someone's had a stab wound or a gunshot wound. It's critical. It's not just about life or death. It's actually about whether they're going to have a life of purpose and meaning if they are provided that life-saving CPR and response as quickly as possible. If you've been shot at close range with a gun, 10 minutes is too long. You're going to lose too much blood. Blood goes away from your brain function is not going to be there. If you get that ambulance there in 3, 4, 5 minutes, you have a chance to have a life of purpose if your life is saved. So these are not small matters. These are not insignificant questions. And so, again, if the city council member wants to say our member budget is more important than reducing that response time from, let's say, 10 minutes to 5 minutes, good luck making that argument to voters. Good luck. That is a loser. And if you want to have that debate, we will have that debate with you next year when you run for re-election. I'll enjoy it. We'll enjoy it, and we'll win that debate. So again, they have a few weeks here to show they're serious. I hope they do. Hope springs eternal. I'm not going to prejudge it for now on behalf of Save Austin Now and our bipartisan coalition, nonpartisan coalition. But they have a chance to do this the right way. And they learned a lesson hopefully on Tuesday night with Prop Q. And like I said, we're going to see what they produce and what they pass and how they vote.
Happening parallel to this is a conversation about the city needing to audit its budget, review its budget, whatever you want to call it. But you all have also said that you would like to see the city do that. What exactly would you like them to do?
Good question. So it's important to compare the models of the city of Houston and the city of Austin just in the last 6 months or year because they're really important. Houston is the 4th largest city in the country. They have one major difference structurally from Austin, that is they have a strong mayor system and we have a weak mayor system. Their mayor, who was a lifelong, 20 or 30 years Democratic state senator named John Whitmire, decided that rather than increase taxes and hold a tax rate election and close their budget gap, which was significant, he was going to push through an outside audit. They hired Ernst & Young to come in to look at efficiency. It cost, I think, around $500,000. Ernst & Young came back with around $120 million in suggested savings. The City Council in Houston took those recommendations, passed a pretty good percentage of them, drew from their savings, and they closed their budget gap without having to hold a tax rate election. As you know, the threshold for a tax rate election is 3.5%, which was set by the state legislature. So they did it the right way. They were serious about their budget. They looked for savings. They made tough decisions. And they held that tax rate below that threshold so they didn't have to ask voters to go vote. Austin did it the wrong way. They did not do enough to find efficiencies. They did not do an outside audit. And instead of trying to close the budget gap, they actually did a 3x tax increase than what they needed. So they did almost everything wrong, which is why you had the result that you had on the Prop Q election. So what we'd like to see is something very similar to Houston. The ideal scenario is the city council and the mayor choose to do that internally, meaning they vote themselves to do it. We don't believe an internal audit will rebuild trust with taxpayers. And so, an affordability, efficiency review of the budget done externally to find savings, to reduce duplication, reduce waste, improve efficiency, improve outcomes is something our city desperately needs. And it is something we are going to demand. The precise day and way that we demand it remains to be seen, but we will be demanding it. And I hope, again, this is such an opportunity for our mayor and our city council to listen to the message voters sent and say, you know what, that did work in Houston, and it can work here, and we're going to do it. And, I want to give, again, Councilmember Mark Duchin, who's a lifelong Democrat, Central Austin first-term council member, a lot of credit here. He said when this came up on the dais, it is not reasonable to have taxpayers pay more when we haven't done the work we need to do. And he said that we need to have this outside review. And so he's been pushing for that. I know there have been some conversations happening behind the scenes at the city level. And again, we hope the city chooses to do that the right way. But we do remain in a position where I think we can force this one way or another. So I would just say stay tuned on that.
Final question here. I would be remiss not to ask. I saw one city council member reference the 2026 bond, which is also coming and is another ask of taxpayers of their money. Anything to say about that?
Yes. Look, bonds are a necessary tool for cities and counties and school districts. They do get overused. And fundamentally, it's up to the voters to decide whether the bond should pass or not. And bonds, voters review bonds. What are our needs? What's the credibility of the people asking? How does it affect affordability and taxes in our community? How long will it take? Our city has used bonds. Obviously, all cities do, and they need to do that to do infrastructure and other capital projects. If the lesson from Tuesday night that they took is we're going to go do everything we want in a bond in November of 2026, that's the wrong lesson. The right lesson is that they need to learn from the message voters sent, and they need to regain the trust of voters as it relates to spending and taxes and affordability. And so, look, if they regain that trust, there's a decent chance a bond would pass in November of 2026. That bond hasn't been put together. There's some ideas out there, housing bond, climate bond, who knows. We would have opinions about all those things. That is an issue for a year from now or 9 months from now when it comes together. We got a long way to go. We have a charter election in front of us. We have a council election next year would be in conjunction with that. So we got a long way to go. But immediately turning your attention to a bond in November of 2026 is not serious. It's not time for that discussion. They need to pass the budget for the 2025-2026 budget year. And voters are going to be watching that closely. We're going to be watching that closely, and they'll be able to determine whether the city council is funding the right priorities or not. And that will affect council races next year, and that will affect any potential bond vote, and it should.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to flesh out Save Austin Now position, and especially because people were hearing so much from you this election. Really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you. SaveAustinNow.com is our website. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all for watching. A reminder that Inside Austin's Agenda airs every other Thursday. We'll see you next time.